So over to Steve for this two-header panel, which is on RDT and also home growing.
Welcome all to this session, which is about eclectic is the word that comes to my mind, in terms of covering two burning issues for cannabis law reform: roadside drug testing, nonsense as it is, and homegrown cannabis. How do we get towards a system where we can have a legal arrangement framework where you grow a few plants yourself, grow it, smoke it yourself, off you go, no trouble. Anyway, long way to get there. Sounds simple. We have a group of people assembled today from the four corners of the postcode anyway, at least. Though some of them, in fact, come from other states, from a large distance. We have scientists, we have lawyers, we have a politician, a group of people who have different interests, different backgrounds. From the far end, Pat Keyzer, a legal academic. He has a special interest in cannabis law reform and drug laws, but in particular has a broader interest around constitutional law, human rights and justice, a bit rare, but anyway. Next to him is Lee Miles, Dr. Miles. He's a biologist and a geneticist, a lot of experience, sort of research experience, involved in the Ethnogenesis Australia organisation, I understand, a group of people interested in psychedelics and the positives about what might be explored with psychedelic substances generally. Then we have Dr. Michael White, an expert on roadside testing, a person with a sort of research background who spent a lot of years looking into the logic and the lack of logic around the scientific justification, those words are inverted commas, for the roadside drug testing laws. Next is Jeremy Buckingham. Jeremy is a Legalise Cannabis member of the New South Wales Parliament. Yay, Jeremy. In his first term, but hopefully not his last term in that role, not up for election today, being a state politician, but has done some good work down in Macquarie Street trying to bang their heads together about the need for law reform. Emily Rigby is I think the chief person in any event of the Australian Medical Cannabis Association. Her passion is around medical cannabis, medicinal cannabis, and all the benefits that flow from that, and a legal framework that makes that more and more accessible to more and more people. And finally, next to me, Simon Pettinger, a local entrepreneur interested in the side. He'll explain his company and the research that he's doing, but interested in looking at new ways of producing a high-quality medicinal cannabis product for those that need it. So, a short round of applause for all of our panellists. Because we're talking about all sorts of things at once, this will make no sense at all. Thankfully, half of the room is pretty stoned already, so that'll be fine for those people. The rest of you just will keep up as best you can. But I'm just going to ask the panellists to just make an opening statement, just briefly to say who you are, I suppose, and why you're interested in the cannabis issue, but in particular asking people to just give a short burst, I suppose, of what they see as the burning issue for reform around the cannabis laws, the burning issues that need to be done in terms of finding out more information. Hey, do we need that? But certainly, what do we need to do in terms of moving the progress that we want to see forward at a good rate? So, a bit randomly, really, we're going to do it. But I think, first of all, Jeremy Buckingham, since he's an expert in all sorts of things, might be the appropriate person to kick us off. We should have time for questions.
Is that on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve.
Over, Jeremy.
Well, I'm the most underqualified person here, and of course, I'm the politician. What's
new?
I know that's what's wrong with the world. All the good people are doing better things and being politicians. But as a Legalise Cannabis MP, the first one in New South Wales, I'm working in what has been a pretty hostile environment, where cannabis law reform has not been on the agenda front and centre. It's been episodic. There's been efforts made by the Greens at times to have cannabis legalised, a few inquiries here and there. Since I got in, I've really focused on what we can achieve with the government we've got at the moment. They say we don't have a mandate for cannabis law reform in terms of legalisation of adult use. So I've had to do some workarounds and be strategic about what I can get achieved. And the key thing I think we can get changes in is the RDT laws. So everyone knows that medicinal cannabis is legalised. There's a presence test. mass screening of in terms of roadside drug testing, and really in particular places like the North Coast and Western Sydney and places like that. And it's catching medicinal cannabis patients, and there's an injustice there that needs to be rectified. We need to move to a regime where people who are taking their medicine in accordance with their doctor's instructions can drive if they're not impaired. So I've worked through the government's drug summit process, and the two things that I wanted out of that drug summit process was a recommendation that they needed to reform RDT in New South Wales, and that got up. The drug summit reported last month and said we do need to reform this space. There's an injustice. We can deal with this and keep people safe on the roads. And then the other really interesting area, working with the government members, and in particular a fellow called Stephen Lawrence, who's a very clever lawyer, is we're working on non-enforcement zones. So what I'm arguing is that they should create an area like the Lismore LGA, local government area, where they don't legalise cannabis, they just don't police personal possession or minor cultivation, a whole range of things, and see what happens. See if society collapses into chaos or mayhem, or maybe it flourishes. And it's a workaround, so the government isn't legalising cannabis, but they're just not enforcing the law in certain areas. And we've seen other jurisdictions around the world do similar things. Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, they've done similar things like that. So that's what I'm working on. I'm working in an environment where we're trying to get something done, but the issues now on the agenda in the Parliament, the political party, the Legalise Cannabis Party, is all very fast growing. We're electing people, we're influential, so they're starting to have to listen to us, and we're getting organised. So it's an exciting time. I'm trying to get some things done and pick off those low-hanging fruit, but I do think that general cannabis law reform will happen in this country this decade.
Thank you. Let's hope. Counting down the decade, but let's hope. Patrick, perhaps you might like to offer some thoughts.
Thanks, Steve, and hi everyone. My name's Patrick Keyzer, and I'm a lawyer, and I come in peace. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about decriminalisation, pick up on something that Jeremy was just talking about. If you look at this ACT model of decriminalisation, the sky hasn't fallen in, and the scientific studies that have come out of that experiment have been very positive. People should be allowed to grow their own pot at home. I think the critical defect of that model, of the ACT model though, is seeds are still illegal. Somehow people are supposed to grow marijuana in their backyard but without seeds. How does that work? I'm not sure. But it's something that's been addressed in the Victorian model, and I think the Victorian legislation that's been introduced by David Eddershank and Rachel Payne in the Victorian Parliament is an excellent model. It's sensible about seeds. It removes those possession offences which are leading to over 70,000 arrests every year. I mean, imagine the amount of revenue that is being spent on 70,000 arrests. I mean, let's just assume that there's an hour of police time, and that would be probably a drastic underestimate for every arrest. Think about all the paperwork back at the station. Think about the lawyers that need to be involved. If people can't afford a lawyer, they need to, get a legal aid lawyer. And then you've got the court system, and you've got all the paperwork. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of wasted resource that could be diverted into maybe enforcing family violence. There are other things that police could be doing other than, enforcing cannabis possession offences. And as a lawyer who spends a lot of time giving pro bono legal advice, I've found that a lot of my clients who have been in prison took their first step into the criminal justice system on a possession offence, or maybe it was one of their offences leading up to that time where a magistrate or a district or county court judge has had to say, well, you've had so many offences, you have to serve a custodial sentence. So it may not be the possession offence that's been at the tipping point, but it's one of a number of offences. And it just shouldn't be a crime. It's as simple as that. So that's my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Well put, if I might say. Emily, you're a scientist and a medicinal cannabis person. What are your contributions? What would you like to tell us about?
It's always interesting to hear how you get introduced. A scientist and a medicinal cannabis person. That was very kind. I like it. Makes me sound smart as well. I'm going to try and keep mine short if I can, because otherwise we could talk forever on these really, really important topics. I just think everyone, agree with all the comments so far. We need to change the regulations. We need to look at rescheduling THC and CBD. This plant is not as harmful as it has been made out to be, and we can go back and look at the history of prohibition and the war on drugs and the huge amount of misinformation, and we're undoing that stigma. We're removing discrimination, but there's still a lot of it here in our society. So I think it's important on all of these topics that we engage in education, that we engage in conversations, that we keep the conversation going all throughout our communities. When we walk out of here, when we leave Nimbin Mardi Gras, we keep that conversation going, because cannabis isn't something that we should be so afraid of. It's been overly regulated. We need to strip that back. I'm going to leave that to the politicians of exactly how they're going to do it, and it's great that the Greens and the Legalise Cannabis Party have been putting bills up at federal and state level to try and get it across the line. They're all good steps in the right direction, but we still have a lot of work to do. But I believe we really do need to look at homegrown being legalised. There's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to grow this beautiful plant in your garden. I think one of the things that people don't realise is the amazing relationship that you can have with a plant. And if that plant is also your medicine, then this is just incredible. For anyone in the room who's ever grown a cannabis plant, it's pretty special. Like, she's pretty beautiful, right? I think of my house plants as pets because they grow, they need attention. The cannabis plant is a beautiful thing for anybody to grow and to try growing their own medicine. The thing is, a lot of people won't be good at it because it's actually harder than most people realise. But some people are really good at it, and so they should definitely be allowed to do that. But we need to make sure there's education programs, because the cannabis plant is a bioremediator. It's really good at drawing heavy metals and pesticide residues out of the soil, so you do need to make sure that you're growing it safely. And we was shown in the ACT, most people are doing really well being able to grow their own. The results that came out of the survey that the Lambert Initiative did is fantastic if you haven't seen it. The sky didn't fall in, and people were growing cannabis. There was actually a lot lower THC and was predominantly really safe and free of mould and things like that. But it was a lot lower THC, and I think it would be better for us as a community if people were able to, if they want to, and if they're able to, grow their own, and even be able to perhaps nominate someone if you can't grow, or if you don't have space to grow, or you're too unwell to grow, or you're too busy, you can actually allow someone else to grow for you. So I think we need to look a little bit further than just home grow, but there's a lot of good examples around the world that we could learn from. I didn't keep it short, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Emily. Nonetheless, words worth speaking, so that's all good. Lee, you're a scientist as well, a geneticist, a biologist, all sorts of ists after your name. What are your thoughts on the topic of random drug testing? I think is one of your key issues. Yeah,
it is one of my key issues. I've got a few issues generally, but with random drug testing, they're just stupid. I believe they don't test for impairment at all. I don't mind if there was a test for impairment, but they don't test for impairment. They just target people that have either had drugs in their mouth or have used drugs previously. It's so damaging. We need to kind of change the way it is. Like, a lot of people, it alters their whole life, and like you're saying, the first incidents can be life-changing in a downhill spiral sometimes. But also as a biologist and a gardener, there shouldn't be any plants we have illegal to grow. It's just preposterous that we can't grow any plants we want. Often when people start growing, like they had an interest in cannabis and they start growing plants, that's the start of their horticultural career. When they're older, then they just love gardening, they love plants in general, being in touch with the environment. And like Emily said, we should be able to just give away things to other people, like in Oregon, where you can give anything away. You can grow mushrooms, you can hand them off to other people that can't grow them. You know, one issue with the making weed illegal is when it was made illegal, people started measuring THC and the concentrations started to increase over time. And you get stronger and stronger strains at the cost of other cannabinoids and other things that are on there. And you know, there are studies coming out that higher and higher doses of THC can have detrimental effects. And some of these other cannabinoids potentially have effects that help prevent that. So I think we should be able to grow whatever plants we want, have a choice of those plants and be able to use them how we want and not be persecuted if we want to drive after they've worn off.
Thank you, Lee. Simon Pettinger is sitting next to me and ready to say something. Simon is the Chief Officer of the company Cymra, if that's how you say it, right? Cymra Life?
Yep.
A company interested in and pursuing the development of high-quality organic medicinal cannabis. Tell us all about it, Simon.
Thanks, Steve. I think echoing what some of the people up here have said, I guess my voice here is for the Australian industry that actually is growing. So we're a local grower in the Northern Rivers. We'll produce around 2 tonne of cannabis this year. I think the last time I looked, there was 300,000 to 400,000 people that are active patients that are getting scripts. So as a percentage of population, I mean, you can work out how many adults and voters are actually in this situation now that are on a medicine and that can't drive. My father recently got a script, but he would only go with CBD because he was cannabis naive, but doesn't want to risk his licence, and there's a lot of fear around that. So there's a lot of people that won't even enter or try cannabis due to the fact that they can't get it. Now, when you think about it from a drug point of view, there's no registered drug for pain. I think it's about 40% of people over the age of 40 in Australia have chronic pain, and there's not one registered drug the TGA have done that you can use because now they've removed a lot of the opioid drugs. So as a government, they're not giving us any options for pain management. And then if we do use cannabis, there's a chance we'll lose our licence, and there's a lot of people in chronic pain. So when you start thinking these things through in your head, you're like, this doesn't make sense. And so it should be easy to change, is what you think, and then it doesn't, and then you get more frustrated. But I think a lot of people think this is on a trajectory to change. We've invested, obviously, a lot of money into the industry, and a lot of the other Australian growers have, and what we're seeing is actually imports flooding into our country, which means Australians aren't even buying Australian products due to a lot of other structural problems that occur in the industry. We think home grow then, the more use that'll occur, the more people that get familiar, that'll reduce the stigma even further, and that'll just make it more normal. So we're very supportive of that, if I'm allowed to say that as a licensed person. I have 9 licenses across 5 different government bodies, so I have to be careful what I say. But yeah, we think that works. And I think the other absurd thing is that a lot of the politicians that will win today will be able to go to Canberra next week and rip a billy and it'll be fine. So they've sorted themselves out. And yeah, it's something that the rest of us can't do. So that's sort of my general opinions.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Sounds like a bit of green tape there to worry about, but good on you for trying that. And last but by no means least, Dr. Michael White is the expert, use that word advisedly, on the science and the research around cannabis impacting, does it at all, on driving, and from that, are the laws fit for purpose or not? You can probably guess his answer, but he'll tell you what that answer is himself.
I might start off on an autobiographical note. About 30 years ago, I was on a national, as a representative of the South Australian Government, I was on a national drug driving working group that was set up to give advice on roadside drug testing around Australia. The group released a report in 2000, and the view of that report was that there was not enough evidence to link the presence of a drug, in particular cannabis, but also perhaps methamphetamine, with impairment. And so that group, set up by the national government to give advice to state governments, advised against the implementation of roadside drug testing. Now that report went out in the year 2000. The Victorian government, being not wanting to please the voters, I think, more than follow the science, just broke with the advice from that report. By the way, that report was done by a National Drug Driving Working Group that had representatives of government, but also had representatives of all of the big road safety research institutions around Australia. So it had a good scientific input. And as a result of that scientific input, the advice was roadside drug testing doesn't have a sufficient scientific basis to be implemented. Victorian government ignored that. Populist government brought in roadside drug testing, and I guess the rest is history. They brought it in 2004, although it was brewing ever since we released our report in 2000. In fact, yeah, no, I'll skip that. I think that's, by the way, there is now also a National Drug Driving Working Group, which is a joke. It's full of police and public servants who won't object to anything. I don't think it's got any scientists on it at all. They commissioned a report from a fairly tame scientist to say that roadside drug testing was a good thing. And this scientist, what he did was to say, look, roadside breath testing for alcohol is a good thing, so roadside drug testing for drugs has got to be a good thing. No evidence, it's never been evaluated, nobody said it's... And in fact, I've talked to a bloke called Ross Hommel. He's sort of the father of deterrence theory in Australia. It was Ross Hommel's deterrence theory that basically brought in roadside breath testing for alcohol in 1970 or whenever. I asked him what did he think of the government's new approach to introducing random breath testing, and he said it's totally unscientific. As someone who was a world expert on deterrence theory, he said he would not have advocated for roadside drug testing. And that's a world expert on deterrence theory, doesn't think it's justified. So it was that sort of history that got me a bit irritated with the intrusion of politics into science. And when I retired 10 years ago, I decided I'd sort of get back into it a bit. With the help of Professor Nick Burns in the Psychology Department at Adelaide Uni, we've written 3 literature reviews. One asks the question, does cannabis impair you? Another asks the question, does cannabis get you into road crashes? And the third asks the question, does alcohol make the effects of alcohol... Sorry, yeah, does cannabis exacerbate the effects of alcohol on impairment and road crashes? Now, the impairment one, we considered cannabis is not terribly impairing. A lot of papers don't find any impairment. Where they do, it's equivalent to an alcohol of about 0.05. On the crash risk study, we found that cannabis doesn't increase crashes much. It may increase crashes by 50%. That sounds like a lot, but alcohol at 0.05 increases crashes by 100%, doubles it. So it's half as bad as legal levels of alcohol. Speeding at 5k above the speed limit doubles your crash risk, increases it by 100%. Again, that's half the increase of 50% from cannabis. So on the crash risk side, it's less risky than legal levels of alcohol and levels of speeding that the police would never take any notice of. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. It's all connected. Thank you for all those different insights, those different perspectives. It's all connected. There's answers that take a long time to find their way to light, but nonetheless, we're working on it. Questions, comments from the floor. We do have microphones. It's much easier to hear if you put your hand up. Please, we've got a microphone to you, to any panel on any topic, any panel member I should say, any topic you like, and we'll get to as many people as we can.
Hi, thank you for your introductions. I just wondered how the research is conducted into the impairment effects. Like, is it taken from accidents that have occurred, or is it taken from actual, like laboratory studies, like a setup with someone driving in a particular place?
The crash risk studies are done on hospital patients who've had a road crash, and you do the toxicology and find out what drugs they've got. And one type of crash risk study is called a culpability study. Were you culpable for the crash, or were you an innocent victim? And what you can do is to look at the drug profile and see if the drugs make you more likely to be culpable for the crash. Now, with alcohol, as the level of alcohol goes up, you're far more likely to be culpable for the crash you were in. With cannabis, it doesn't depend on your level of cannabis in the blood, doesn't depend on the level of THC, but if you average out a lot of studies, it's about a 50% increase in crash risk. So it comes from looking at the drug profiles of crash drivers and looking at whether, or at least in one type of study, the main one, whether they were culpable for the crash or innocent victims of the crash, and matching all of that up. Yeah.
One of the other things that we've been drilling down to in Parliament, using parliamentary processes, is in New South Wales it's called the Centre for Road Safety. They're the body, the agency that oversees the development of our road safety laws. And one of the things that they have said again and again is in 16% of fatal accidents, cannabis is present in the blood of someone who's died in the accident. And the question I ask is that because that cannabis is present in the blood of 16% of the population? That's because, and that's actually about right. That's about 15% of the population are regular cannabis users. So there might be a correlation, but there's not a causation in terms of cannabis being present. So, and then I asked, in that 16%, how many of those blood tests were cannabis only? There was like cannabis but no alcohol, or cannabis and no other illegal drugs, no other prescription drugs. They didn't want to give me that information. It took me a year to get that information, and it was about 1%. 1%, it was about 4 fatal accidents a year in New South Wales, and there's about 300. It was about 1.5% of accidents. It was cannabis only, and then in that, you still had road condition, environment, fatigue, mechanical failure, mobile phones, other things. So it was a tiny amount. So that was really strong evidence that it's not a problem in our society, because if it was, we'd all know it, because there would be another fatality. In this community, you would probably know if it was a big problem, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who've died on the roads because of cannabis, and it's just not the case. So the policing is through the roof. The laws aren't fit for purpose. The risk is very low, and the evidence that's coming out of the Lambert Initiative, Swinburne, from other jurisdictions, is building that case. And I think the legislators are increasingly confident they can bring in a change and keep the roads safe.
And just to build on that, so a lot of times when they test the blood from these crash victims, you have to look into what they're testing for with cannabis, because often they test for metabolites and not just delta-9. It depends of how they can tell generally how impaired, but they might not. It might just be presence or. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, hand up.
Sorry, we're just microphone wrangling. Sorry. The Securitech tests, they're the only contracted device that's allowed to be used in Australia?
No, I think there's about 7 or 10 that they are allowed to use. They generally just have a good contract with Securitech, and they use them predominantly, but they have the option to use many tests, and that's generally only the first line test as well. When you get a positive on that test, you're normally taken to the bus or whatever, and then you do the cortisone Raspan test, which has high sensitivity and detects for more, but they can use any number of tests if they have them.
Okay, and that's where the chain of custody comes in with the second test. Because the first test, I mean, those tests could have been sitting in the back of a car for a month and be irrelevant or inaccurate. But the second test is... So there's no chain of custody, effectively, for the testing devices at the first stop. Yeah,
and with the second test, they send your saliva sample off to do a proper analysis where it will come up if anything's in there. Yeah. So that's where the chain of custody would come in.
So there's no chain of custody from when the saliva test leaves the warehouse to when it's used on somebody.
I'm not sure about that.
Stop.
Yeah, perhaps I can jump in and answer that question. I'm a lawyer, I know a bit about that. The first test, using that word, it's just a swab. The Securitech device is just a swab. That is just an indicator of whether or not there might be a drug present. That swab is just thrown away. The plastic stick is just thrown away. If it is positive, you're taken then to a bus or a police station, then they take a sample of your saliva, put that into a machine called a Dragar machine. There's different things, I think, in different states, but most states, I think, use the Dragar, and that then gives a reading about whether or not there's anything found by that machinery. It's that sample that's then sent to the lab, and it's that sample that's tested, and that sample is the basis for any criminal charge or any penalty notice that gets issued. So the chain of custody issue about the swab device doesn't really matter. It's just a sort of indicator. There's no legal basis one way or the other, except that's the basis for your arrest and the further testing.
With that second test, if you test negative on that second test, they still send your sample away.
That's right.
But if it's positive, you won't get charged.
And another...
so they use that second device as the main one.
Issue... Is that on? Is that on? It's on. Sorry. Another issue is that in New South Wales, they've just brought in new laws. So it's not only in fatal road accidents now that they're going to require all parties to it to have a blood test. It's in any accident where there's grievous bodily harm. So anyone who's just seriously hurt. So in the situation, you're a medicinal cannabis patient, you've had your medicine the night before, you're sitting at the traffic lights, someone drives into the back of you and smashes your car up and hurts you, you have a drug test, they have a drug test, you test positive for THC, you should not have been on the road. It's your fault. So you're liable in that situation. So because the government is bringing that regime in, it actually means that they're going to have to move pretty rapidly to create a defence for people who have THC in their system if they're on a prescription. So that's the government wants to bring this regime in, and so they're going to have to. It's only it's aggravate these new laws are only furthering and aggravating the injustice that exists. So that's the case I'm making to the state government, and they seem to be listening.
I'm actually really glad to see that we're finally starting to see some movement in Parliament for medicinal cannabis patients and driving. The amount, the discrimination is ridiculous. If you take other pharmaceutical drugs, benzos, as an example, or strong opioids, it says on the packet of medicine that you can discuss, obviously you discuss it with your doctor, but it tells you not to operate machinery, if affected. Whereas with cannabis, we don't have that option. So I think the important thing here is we've seen with all of Michael's research and the reviews, it doesn't increase the risk on the road. I'm all for safety on the roads, but it doesn't increase the risk. What we've got is a convoluted system that actually there's a lot of money involved. So police are getting paid, people's equipment, swabs. Think of all those swabs. Someone's making a lot of money selling those swabs and the equipment. I heard earlier the police get paid when they do the swabs as well. Obviously then there's the labour. There's a lot of money involved here just to discriminate against patients. They don't have to be, we're not looking at them as medical cannabis patients, they are just patients like everybody else, whereas if you take these other drugs, it's not an issue. It's up to you to determine whether you're safe to drive. So it doesn't look at the science. As we know, it doesn't test whether you're under the influence. It tests for a presence, and it's an absolute joke. So we need to change the laws immediately. I know nothing happens quickly. I'm glad there are people like Jeremy fighting for this in Parliament, because I know the whole political system drives me nuts, and everything happens really, really slowly, but very grateful for this push. But I think we have to make noise. We, as a part of this community, for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our family members, the number of people, as Simon mentioned earlier, who don't take medical cannabis that could help them because they can't have the THC in their system. And so they stick with the opioids or benzos or other drugs that are perhaps not as safe or not even as effective for them. So we really need to see this thrown out. Like, the science has been there for decades. And I think it's about time that we had this at a federal level, but I'll take it state by state, and I'm very grateful for the tiny baby steps we're making. But we all need to help rally and get behind this movement. Otherwise we don't get change.
Simon, thank you.
Thanks. And I think the people can't have THC in their system, not just for driving, for employment. So I have a lot of friends and family that work in companies that aren't allowed to have THC in the system and therefore don't take it, not even driving to the job. But on driving, I think it's a little bit taboo to talk about how you don't want to see carnage on the roads, no one wants to see road deaths. However, I think New South Wales has set some very aggressive targets on lowering the number of deaths that will occur on the road. And then there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of politicians that are prepared to talk hard on road safety. And so I think there's a broader cultural conversation around the fact that driving is risky. There is going to be a level of risk on the road. Have they set the target too low? And therefore they'll drive towards this. I think it's how many road deaths, 2030?
Their goal is zero.
Zero road deaths. Now, as an adult and with a group of other adults, is that a realistic target? And what rules and laws are they going to change for us to follow, because they can't achieve a target that they never set, that we'd never really all agreed on, isn't an achievable target. And I think that, how can we have a discussion about whether they're going to allow us to then drive with cannabis in our system when they're working towards a zero target? They're looking for all these reasons to then test a person who wasn't even driving the car or wasn't even causing the accident to be tested. So I think somehow, like, you'll drive on the road and you'll see all of a sudden it was 80, it's been 80 my whole life, and now I'm driving on that road and it's 60. And the laws keep changing on the road constantly, making it more rules, more laws. And I think there's a cultural discussion that needs to occur, especially in New South Wales, around the fact that there are risks in driving. And that sort of, how can you have the discussion around THC in your system when you're going to have these targets? It's going to be very hard to make any political change. As soon as someone is on medicine, has THC in their system, causes an accident, you can just imagine what will occur after that. Because I guarantee you, just with percentages, there will be an accident with a person with THC in their system. So if it's legally allowed, you can imagine what conversations will take place after it. And I think if we're going to say we're going to change the laws, you need to be ready for that when it occurs.
Thank you. Another question?
Yeah. I just don't get it, that according to the federal law, I'm allowed to take opiate, ketamine, a whole heap of stuff. And according to the state law, they have no rights to stop me because 109 says they can't. Now, as far as I know, the TGA says that I can use cannabis. So if the federal make a law that I can use cannabis, how can the state make a law that says I can't? And how can they even make laws for driving when it's not a state issue, because cannabis is a federal issue? So 109 of the Constitution, there's inconsistency, the states making laws with the federal. So why is the state overriding the federal law?
Patrick?
Yeah.
You do have a comment?
Yeah, 109.
Constitutional lawyer. I'll try and help out here. Okay, it's Australia came about a little bit differently to the United States. You know, they had a revolution and all that sort of thing. But before they had their revolution, they were 13 colonies. right? And what that means is when they became the United States, all the colonies wanted to make sure that they got a say in how things worked. And that ended up with their Senate, right? So in the United States, 50 states, everybody's got 2 senators. So California has like 50 million people and 2 senators. Rhode Island has about 300,000 people and it's got 2 senators. South Dakota, 200,000 people, 2 senators, right? So the effect of that is it creates a conservative gerrymander in your federal parliament, right? We've got exactly the same thing in Australia. So the Senate, but the difference is in the Senate, the way we have our voting system, you can elect people from minor parties into the Senate, and that's when you start to see the change. And that's what David Shoebridge was talking about this morning in the federal Senate, and it's what Jeremy is talking about in the work that he does at the state level. Okay, so when you have a federal system, political power, legislative power is divided between your national government and your states. In Australia, we have what's called enumerated powers. So you go to section 51 of the Constitution, it contains a list. It's like a laundry list or a shopping list. It's got a list of all the things that the national parliament, the Commonwealth Parliament, the federal parliament, that they can do, right? All the things they can regulate, but they can't regulate everything. Some stuff is left to the states, right? There's some stuff that only the states can do, but not a lot, not a lot. Because since 1920, the High Court of Australia has said that federal power is big and state power is small. I could be more specific than that, but it would take me an hour. Generally speaking, the federal parliament can override state law to the extent of its inconsistency. So your reference to section 109 was right on point. And that's the problem that we have in this federal system when it comes to cannabis decriminalisation and legalisation, because states and territories can take steps to decriminalise and to legalise, but as soon as you get a government in power in Canberra that is of a different political colour, different political hue, they're going to pass legislation that's going to override state law or territory law to the extent of its inconsistency. So unfortunately, in a federal system, it's designed to divide power, and it means it's always going to be a situation of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, some of you are old enough like me to remember Don Dunstan when he was Premier of South Australia. He introduced decriminalisation of marijuana in South Australia about 40 years ago. So there have been early attempts to do this. And we do have decriminalisation of homegrown, etc. in the ACT. And what we need to do now, or what people need to do, is place pressure on their state politicians to adopt the ACT model and broaden it. And you've got to be active. You've got to be politically active if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, because there's so many political dimensions to this. There's so many companies that sell the equipment that are used for the drug testing. There's so much lobbying that happens in the corridors of state parliament or in the federal parliament. There's a lot of money tied up in a lot of industries that are involved in the criminal justice system. This is going to freak you out, but hands up, how many people know how many prisons there are in the eastern seaboard states in Australia? There are 100 prisons. If you count all the prisons in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, you come to almost 100 prisons. There are 100 prisons in the eastern seaboard of this country, and that creates its own political dynamic. All the people who want to keep prisons open, all the people who want to make sure the criminal justice system keeps expanding, all the people who say, oh, well, we're not only going to do toxicology reports on people who die in crashes, we're going to look at people who are the victims in crashes as well, if there's been grievous bodily harm. It's called net widening. And this is what governments do. They expand the reach of the criminal justice system. So what you need to do is you need to get politically active, and you need to get your politicians in the right places and make sure those politicians understand that their job is to restrict the size of the criminal justice system, to reform the criminal justice system, to reduce the scope of the criminal justice system so that there's less of the enforcement. I'll make one final point. One of the interesting things that happened in the United States is once a critical mass of the 50 states decriminalised and then legalised marijuana, one of the things that President Biden did that was quite good, he did some good things, he did some bad things, but one of the things he did that was really good was he basically zeroed out the federal enforcement budget for cannabis. So you've probably all heard of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, which is the federal agency in the United States that investigates drugs. He took the section of the DEA that was focused on cannabis and he zeroed out their budget. Simple executive step, remove the budget, they're not going to enforce it anymore. They still enforce drugs, but they don't enforce cannabis. So what you need to do is get active politicians who are going to put pressure on government to say, zero out your enforcement budgets. And that's why your LGA example from before, Jeremy, was a really good one. You know, you could look at, say, let's look at a local government area, zero out the enforcement budget in that area, run it as a trial, do some scientific studies, get the sort of work that, you know, that Dr. White does, get scientists involved. So we've got information, so we've got transparency, we all know what we're doing, we all know how we're going about it, and we can regulate things properly.
I still don't get it. Because
Did I answer your question?
No.
Oh, sorry.
You didn't, because
that's the only answer you're going to get, Rob, I'm sorry.
The 106 says the state's bound to this constitution.
No.
Yeah.
All their
Rob,
constitutions are bound to this constitution.
Yeah.
And 109 says that the federal make a law, if the federal make a law and the state disagree, then the federals win, basically.
Yeah.
So the federal TGA, it's federal.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
the federal TGA says no, cannabis is a medical, and opium and all these others because of the Narcotics Convention of 62, I think it is, and 69 or something like that. So here we have the federal government saying you can use cannabis, but the state's going against them saying no, you can't use cannabis, you can't drive. So which oxymoron should I believe?
Well,
right?
I
The
tell you,
state or the federal?
Can I tell you this? After teaching and practicing constitutional law for over 30 years, if you're looking for common sense and logic in Australian constitutional law, you're looking in the wrong place. But I'll come and have a talk to you afterwards about it. But I'll just say this one thing. Ignore section 106. The High Court has read it right down. Focus your attention on section 109 because that's really the main reason why we're going to have a 2 steps forward, 1 step back over the next 10, 20 years in this area. But I'll come and talk to you after.
Just to add something to that, you said that the TGA said you could have it and then federal said you couldn't. The TGA hasn't particularly said you can have it and drive. And last year, it sounds like an overreach to me, but the TGA removed a formulation of cannabis that was allowed to be prescribed that was encapsulated because they realised it didn't come up on tests. So that means that they also have an agenda and are also influenced by the surrounding of them.
Okay, interesting.
One other political entity to consider in this, and that is the New South Wales Police Force. The New South Wales Police Force is the world's oldest police force. It's also per capita the most powerful and biggest. I think it's only the New York and California police forces are bigger. It has a multi-billion-dollar budget. It's incredibly political, internally and externally, and what it wants to do is just get more power. It doesn't care what it's policing, but it wants to police because it means more police, more money, more budget, more influence. And the police have said to me that the reason that they like RDT is because it's a prohibition measure, because it generally creates a disincentive in the population to consume cannabis. They know that it's not a road safety measure. They just know that they believe it's a suppression measure, and it adds a budget to to their bottom line, which is we're going to spend $200 million on mass screening RDT. Nowhere else does it in the world, by the way. Nowhere else in the world screens its population for RDT like we do in Australia. And like we principally do in New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland. So we're a unique entity, and principally because we've got this gigantic police force that has incredible political power, and the politicians are terrified of them.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, we don't have to worry about chemtrails. We just have to look at the drug laws to see real conspiracies going on about, surveilling our population. So definitely, there's something that's very real and very happening and has been going on for a long time. Hey, guys, I think we're going to have to wind it up because Jeremy has to jump on a combi. Oh, you're in a combi. You're not going to be riding the top of it okay.
In. Driving it?
So I was going to say, let's wind it up and please, if you have any more questions, feel free to approach any of our lovely speakers. They're here this weekend. I'm sure they'd love to have a conversation.
They're all lovely, all the speakers. Thank you to everyone for coming. Patrick, Lee, Michael, Jeremy, Emily and Simon. Expertise abounds at Mardi Gras.